This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 52.
I think the basis of what I do is very heavily grounded in data tracking. You have to know where every student stands in the pacing of the sequencing of the curriculum, know what they're excelling at, know what they're struggling at, know what materials they've learned and what they haven't gotten to yet.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
What's going on, everyone? This is Ken Herman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here without my co-host, Mr. Matt Winter Break Rogers. We are recording this episode during the coveted winter holiday break, and just for timing reasons, it didn't work out for Matt to join us tonight, and I'm super excited that he's taking a break. He's away with his wife, enjoying some relaxing, unplugged time. It's so important for us to do this as educators. It's easy, and we've had these conversations. It's easy to fall into the rhythm of constantly checking email, constantly lesson planning, or thinking about what you're going to do the next day. But it's been proven. I don't have the science to quote it or the data to quote it, but I've read it and heard it before that it's proven that when you completely separate yourself from your work or from your creative planning or your writing, whatever those things that we're involved in, and you come back, you have a new perspective, you're refreshed, and you'll be more productive. And so I challenged some of my colleagues to, completely separate for an extended period of time over break, where we took the challenge not to check email for multiple days in a row. I reached out to some of our newer teachers before break and encouraged them to completely, shut down the computer, leave it off for a few days. You have to enjoy time with family. You have to enjoy time with yourself. You have to separate yourself before you can come back refreshed and give the best thing possible to your students. So tonight I had the opportunity of interviewing Eric Combs, the 2020 Teacher of the Year from Illinois, and it was just a fantastic conversation. He's a middle school band teacher, and the conversation did not live in middle school band. We talked about his unique and his creative and his really motivational instructional strategy that he's using for students and how that directly applies to any content area. I compared it a lot to my fifth grade math classroom because a lot of the strategies that we used were very similar in what he did and what I did. But it's really focused on personalizing learning. And so his methods, he's using flipped instruction, he's using data, he's using check-ins, and he's using student empowerment, all of these different facets to create an atmosphere where students are able to self-pace, guide themselves through his curriculum over multiple years. And it's very systematic, but it's also very student-centered. And it was just really enjoyable to hear how he's designed that and how it's taken time. We focus on a conversation where, this is not something that you can implement tomorrow, especially if you're new to your content area or your grade level. But over time, you can start to put pieces together and transform your classroom into an atmosphere where students are more motivated and they'll also flourish at a much higher rate. It was really interesting when he talked about the impact that they have found on their most advanced band students as well as their lowest level band students. And so, there's a lot that you're going to be able to pull out of this and apply to your own position and really think of it as an inspiration and motivation to possibly get this journey started. Or you might find that you're already on that journey based on some of the strategies you use and the next steps you can take to bring it to a whole new level. So without delaying any further, let's bring in Eric for that fantastic interview. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for joining with us. So let's start things off by just officially introducing yourself, where you're coming from, and just kind of a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like for you.
Sure. So my name's Eric Combs. I have been teaching for 17 years now, all at the middle school level. I teach band. I teach specifically beginners. So I have a sixth, seventh, and eighth grade beginning band students. I teach in Central Illinois. So I'm about 5 hours south of Chicago, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. I've always taught in small rural schools my entire life. And I was the 2020 Illinois State Teacher of the Year.
Excellent. What was that experience like for our education and teacher listeners that have no experience or connection to the teacher of the year process and kind of the final stages? And I also know, just following you on social media, you also recently were able to visit the White House, which I can only imagine. So just share some of the excitement and the work that went into receiving that award.
Yeah. So first of all, 3, 4 years ago, I had no clue that there even was a state teacher of the year or a national teacher of the year program. And I hear that from a lot of people. The process goes in Illinois goes something like somebody will nominate you. For me, it was administration. And that goes to a team of people at the State Board of Education who then narrow it down to 10 people in Illinois. And from there, they bring you into the state capitol to do interviews that are recorded. They then narrow that down to 3 people. They send that to the state superintendent, and then she picks the winner. They have that at a kind of an awards gala that they have near the Capitol in Bloomington, Illinois. And they bring in, well, the last couple of years, they've had the governor come and speak at it. State superintendent then reveals the winner there in front of a large crowd. So it's really kind of an exciting process. And from there, you go on to have engagements throughout the state for the next year. For me, it didn't quite go that way because I was named and started at the beginning of 2000. And about a month into that, 2 months into that's when the pandemic hit. So everything got shut down for me. I ended up doing a lot of stuff remotely like we're doing right now. And they pushed everything back about a year and a half. Till finally we were able to go in person to the White House, because they do that every year to name the National Teacher of the Year. The Bidens had us there. We met out in the lawn, the South Lawn. We listened to Jill Biden speak for about a half an hour to us. We didn't know that Joe Biden was going to show up, but he did at the very end of it. So that was really exciting. He got to speak to us for about 10 minutes, and it was a pretty great time. And that was how we ended our year as Teacher of the Year.
It's really incredible. I was a finalist for Pennsylvania, and a lot of what you said is pretty similar. One, I had no idea that it really existed, or I knew there was a Teacher of the Year, but I didn't really know what went into it. And on the last day of school with my fifth graders, they presented me with a couple of class gifts, and one of them was the nomination form that was signed by every parent of that class. So that's how I was nominated. And ours was similar, multiple tiers of interviews to narrow it down, and then an awards gala, like you said, where they announced the winner, and that's where my journey ended. But I think it's incredible that regardless of who's in office, I don't know how long the tradition has been going on, but I know it's been going on for a long time, where they invite all 50 Teacher of the Year, State Teacher of the Year winners. They announce the national winner, and it's also a lot of work that goes into it. When we were at the awards ceremony, it was paired with a conference in Pennsylvania. So we were kind of learning from former finalists, former Teachers of the Year, everything that went into being the winner. And I remember one of the parents was invited out that I had as her son, because they wanted students to speak at the event. And she looked at me and she looked at my wife and she said, "I'm so sorry I nominated you. I had no idea everything that was into winning." She's like, "I thought that's when it ended." But it's obviously a very humbling experience, regardless of where that takes you. What's one of besides the White House, which obviously is incredible, what is something that has come from being Teacher of the Year that has really been beneficial for your career and your own personal growth that you didn't foresee coming?
Well, like I say, I teach in a very rural Southern Illinois town, and because of that, my view of the United States and of the world has been very limited up until this. So one thing that it really did for me is it broadened my view of what's going on in the state and in the nation. As soon as I was named State Teacher of the Year, within about, I don't know, probably the first 10 minutes, my Facebook started exploding with other past Teachers of the Year and finalists that were wanting to connect. And I went from, I don't know, probably something like 60 Facebook friends to 2,500 pretty quickly because of that. And have made a lot of friends through that process all over the nation and actually all over the globe. I have a friend in India who I talk to regularly now because of this, and so the broadening of perspective has been very great for me, and that means that I can take things that I'm learning that are going on around the state, and I can bring them back to my rural school and share them with the people here, so that we know what's going on in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the networking of it is really the power that exists, and it's something that regardless of being nominated, earning multiple accolades or zero accolades is something that is super beneficial for us to do as teachers, really reaching outside of our district walls, our classroom walls. That's why conferences are so important. It's so important to expose ourselves to other educators, and it's really why I started this podcast, because I wanted people to be able to connect with, you know either by listening or following up with the show to learn from other great teachers. So let's dig into band. This is your bread and butter, what you're doing day in and day out. What is it that you would say separates you, that even got you towards being nominated to be Teacher of the Year as a middle school band teacher?
Interestingly, that actually starts with some failures of my own. Like I say, I've been teaching for 17 years, and 17 years ago, when I got my first job teaching middle school is not what I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach high school. I never imagined that I was going to be a middle school teacher. Didn't really know anything about middle school students, didn't know how they thought, how they processed information. And I had a really stressful and, I would say, unsuccessful first couple of years. One thing that I did learn from that experience is that colleges, not just my college, but all colleges, don't do a great job of teaching curriculum for beginner music students. We kind of in the profession tend to focus on the early years from kindergarten through fifth grade general music, and then also on more professional ensembles like higher level high school, college ensembles, how to teach them. But there's this gap of teaching beginners for the first 3 years that just hasn't been covered in the literature. So I kind of took my first steps about 10 years ago to I decided I wanted to be the one that was going to write that book, write the curriculum for middle school band students. So I developed an approach of my own, just kind of in a bubble, for teaching band in a way that was very individualistic, that was guided towards every student's individual needs. And to do that, what I did was I wrote out every single element that a musician would need to know from the day that they first are handed their instrument to the day that they become a professional and step onto stage. And then I sequenced those elements out as logically as I could. Came up with some very, very basic exercises for every single one of those elements to teach it its simplest form. And then I created a beginner band program where every student could go through that at their own pace. I had never heard the term flipped classroom before. Later, I found out that's exactly what it was. I wish I would have heard that term 10 years ago. It would have made me go quicker at doing this. So anyway, the bands became fairly good at that point and started winning some national awards. Another thing that I started doing was also coming from a Title I community where a lot of the kids can't afford instruments. We were able to write for some grants, and we now have 107 instruments that we lend out totally for free to the students. Last year's beginner band was 100% on free instruments. So I do a lot of going around the halls, offering free instruments to kids, trying to get them to come in and play at no cost, and then teaching them individually. So when I started seeing that was pretty successful, what I did was I started posting about it on social media and just giving little tips and some guidelines on how to teach beginners. And didn't really expect it to happen, but it kind of caught some traction pretty quickly. And over the course of the first year, I was contacted by over 750 other band directors that were saying, "Hey, I really want to implement this curriculum into my program." So I ended up writing a book about it and sharing the book for free. And now it's kind of spread worldwide, where I have teachers all over the globe that are using this program. Um, I also started a website thinking that other band directors might be able to share some of their free stuff as well. It's called www.banddirectorsshare. So I put all my free materials on that, all my videos that I had made, and also make it available to other music teachers where they can put their free stuff on there just by sending it to me and I upload it. And from there, it's kind of spread. I've used the internet tracking tools to see that it's gone out to 41 different countries, and lots of teachers are now using this. So from there, it actually went a little further. A friend of mine in Honduras, who runs, I guess is probably the word for it, an orphanage down in Honduras, has about 70 instruments that have been donated, and also about 70 students that are living there at the orphanage. And about 3 years ago, he told me that he had no way to teach these kids how to play music, and he was wondering what could he do to teach them music. And what I told him was that you really need to have a full-time teacher there. And he said, "Well, we can't really do that because of the cost." He told me what it was going to cost for a full-time teacher there. So I was able to organize some funds, a lot of it coming through this Band Directors Share website, donations, to where they were able to hire a full-time music instructor in that orphanage. So that was about around the time that I was named the State Teacher of the Year for those things.
Wow, that's that's incredible, and I'm excited to dig into a few of those key topics. Instructionally, the flip piece as well, because it was a model I used. Not I didn't have to develop as much on my own like you did, but before jumping into that, the grant. So I know of many teachers who have won multiple grants and other teachers who think it is impossible that they'll ever win a grant. And so, for the teachers that have never applied for a grant or maybe looked into one or only applied for one, what would you say? What advice would you have for finding grants that match your goals, for writing them out, or for kind of how to jump into that to support either your own specific classroom or your school or your district as a whole?
Google is your best friend on that. So I've got some grants that I've done individually. The bulk of them, and the big one that we got, was a team effort. And we were lucky enough for 1 year to have a grant writer that was on staff. That's the only year I know that that's ever happened. And we got a fairly sizable grant that year. But apart from that, just do a Google search for school grants. For me in particular, it was for band instrument grants or music grants. I spent about a week straight, 8 hours a day, going through Google, writing in every different combination in the search bar that I could, making a list of all these different grants, and then just going through one by one and reading what the descriptions were and just start filling them out. So I would say summer is a great time to do that. Put aside some time over the summer and just start Googling stuff and reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about being a title school. Think about those different classifications that your school might have, because there are grants that are specific to being a Title I school or being, different components of what you're looking for. You can sometimes find niches where not a lot of schools can apply to increase your odds of succeeding. And I think this summer is a great time to do that research, and don't get discouraged by missing deadlines. Most grants happen on an annual basis. There are not many, at least to my knowledge, there are not many that pop up out of nowhere and then never reappear. They're typically very organized, and they happen deadlines. If it's a September 30th deadline, it's probably going to be September 30th of the following year. So if you find grants that match to what you need, or the description seems like something that you would fall right into, but you miss the deadline, just put a calendar notification for whatever date you need to remember to revisit that the following year. Is there anything specific in the language you're using, or maybe you learned from the grant writer, in terms of catching the eye of the people awarding them, or things to focus on, whether it's student growth or equity, or just different things that you think are important in including in your grant proposals?
Yes, I'm going to answer that, but I also want to go back to two things that you said uh, that I think were really important. Number one being that you need to know the metrics of your school. We have the Illinois School Report Card, which is throughout the state of Illinois. They have metrics on every school. And if you go to that, check out for your school. For me, it was the fact that we were a 67% poverty rate, which you're correct. A lot of the grants will have a cutoff on your poverty rate, and that's the biggest one that I've seen. Most of them have a cutoff of 50%. Now that's not the same for all of them. And then the other part of that, and I'm trying to rack my brain to remember what the other. we're gonna move on. I can't remember what the other point
That's
was.
okay. The deadlines,
but
maybe.
oh yeah, the deadlines. Yeah, thank you. So as far as deadlines, I actually kept an Excel file that had a list of all of these different grants that I found, and I put the date on it, like you said, and then periodically through the year I'll go back and I'll look at that, and I did set the calendar deadlines and was able to catch several that way. So it actually ends up being a multi-year process. You find them, and it might be another year before you go ahead and write for those things. But save what you write for one. Save a file of what you're writing for them, so you don't have to keep on reinventing the wheel. And I usually just tweak them a little bit as I go from one to the next. Now, to answer your question, I have found that a lot of these grants and awards are focused more on stories than metrics. If you can come up with a story of something that you've done in your program, of how an individual life has been touched, the people that are reviewing these like to hear about individuals instead of talking in generalities of groups. Name somebody and say, this is how this has helped that person. Having this would further help that person, and this is how we would use anything that we got from the grant, and try to personalize it and make it emotional in that way.
That's interesting. I never thought about identifying the individuals and telling the stories like that. That's a good tip. So so pivoting back to what you were talking about with developing your own individual pace for these students. So there's a lot that I want to ask you about, because one, it really matches a lot of my own passions, and I think a lot of it can apply to every subject area teacher, every grade level. But let's try to get a picture of what a typical class may look like, where you're kind of like in the meat of it, not the day where you're introducing this to your students. But I walk into your classroom in I don't know, February, where you're really in the meat of the year. What does your classroom look like, and how are these components that you talked about and these individual pacings all coming together, and what does that facilitation look like in the room?
I think the basis of what I do is very heavily grounded in data tracking. You have to know where every student stands in the pacing of the sequencing of the curriculum. Know what they're excelling at, know what they're struggling at, know what materials they've learned and what they haven't gotten to yet. Because if everybody knows different things at different points of the curriculum than everybody else, that means you got some people that are way ahead, you got some people that are behind the rest of the group, and you have to be keeping track mentally and for me on a computer of where everybody is. So for me, that involved creating my own computer program that would chart that out, graph it out, actually give you bar graphs, line graphs of where everybody's at, where the average number of people is at. And I developed a system of grading for grade cards based on that. A lot of times in a music classroom or any kind of a fine art classroom, you'll find that teachers are giving grades that are fairly objective and sometimes are more of a behavior grade than anything else. Less of a grade on how the kid is actually doing in class as far as comprehension, and more of, did they bring their instrument? Did they bring their pencil? Were they misbehaving? I know teachers will dock kids' letter grades because they're misbehaving. To me, that is grading something other than what they're supposed to be learning in that classroom. I want my grade to be not subjective at all. I want it to be based on content that is acquired. So what I do is I tell the kids, you can move through this at your own pace. As you pass off songs perfectly, you're going to get a point. I give them at the beginning of their time in my class a packet of the first 100 points, which for some kids, that'll be what they get through the first half a year. For other kids, it might take them 3 years to get through it, just however fast they get through it. But I do set guidelines. If you have to be at this point at the end of the 9 weeks with this number of points in order to get an A, if you have this number of points, you're going to get a B. Get this number, you're going to have an F, so that the kids can have some accountability and know exactly what their grade's going to be. Then, whenever you walk into the classroom, to answer that question, I have processed all this data and I know where the median line is. I know where the A line is. And I want to make sure that I'm teaching the A level materials to all the kids. But then I try to, from day to day, hit those areas in the curriculum that I know that the majority of kids are at. And a certain part of that also involves a flipped aspect where the kids can get online and they can see some instruction on something that maybe hasn't been covered in class. Because if a kid is really, really far ahead, then I'm not going to be talking about that to the entire group. They're going to need to have some kind of a digital means of going somewhere on the internet and hearing a short explanation of how to do their next thing so that they don't have to wait on me to tell them how to do something.
It's incredible. The thing that so I do not have music experience. I didn't play instruments. So what I'm trying to wrap my head around, because what you're describing is very similar to the way that I taught math in fifth grade. What I'm struggling to comprehend and see as even feasibly possible is the fact that you have, I don't know how many different instruments in your room. So how does that play a factor when you're flipping this instruction? You have different paces of a student is ready to, do this musically while other students are 5 steps back, but you have 4 different instruments taking place at the same time.
Yes, and there could be up to 140 kids that are in there also. So we're talking mass instruction for all these kids at their own pace. And there are several things that I've done to help with this. Number one is I open up my classroom from 7:45 in the morning, which is whenever they let kids into the building, up until 8:10. And they can come in every morning. And part of that is I know that some of these kids can't practice at home. It's just not possible for them. So this gives them 25 minutes every morning that they can come and practice. So they won't need to practice at home. I will answer any questions they have then, let them pass off points then. So that gives me some one-on-one time with kids whenever they need it. Also free lessons after school. Because I know that living out in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, these kids aren't going to get lessons from anywhere else. They're going to have to come from somewhere. So it's going to be me. So allowing kids to come in after school, sign up for lesson times for that. But then also something that's been really important at our school is I started an honor band that happens from 7 a.m. to 7:45. And so the criteria to get into that is to pass a certain number of points by a certain time period. The kids know that. The kids that reach that point can then come into the honor band. And I've developed a system to where these kids that are progressing really quickly can learn some really advanced stuff. We're talking high school level music, some easy college level music here at the middle school. And then I'll take those same kids that are in that honor band. They'll be in the regular band during the school day with everybody. And I just intersperse their seating. So I'll have an honor band student here, and then whoever has the lowest number of points here, followed by another honors band student. And then I just tell the kids, if you have a question about anything that's going on in class, ask the person beside you. I don't tell them because I know that you don't know this stuff, but the person beside you does. I don't say that. But I know that the materials I'm teaching in that band to everybody, all the honor band students already know it. I know that because I've been tracking what they know and what they don't know, and I've been monitoring that. And I know that if a kid doesn't know it, that the person beside them is going to be able to help them with it. So the kids, I do tell them that I want them to be teachers to the kids, to the rest of the kids that are in the ensemble. And I let them know, hey, talking's okay in the class. If you keep it musical, you can talk to the person beside you, tell them how to, what a fingering is on a note, or what a rhythm is, or explain stuff to them so that they can become leaders like that. Also, every music program has stuff like district festivals, solo contests, So you get these kids that are really progressing quickly, and then you can even individualize their instruction more by giving them lessons after school for free, and individualizing the music that they get to take for those types of things as well.
It's incredible. I love that strategy of empowering your honors students, targeting that, the very specific placement of them. It's a lot of little things that you're putting together to create this experience, and to just to relate it to a general area content teacher. When I was teaching fifth grade, very similar. One of the most important components that you hit on is the data driven, is the data. So I was constantly giving my students very simple check-ins on the content, so I knew, did they know how to find common denominators? Did they know how to add fractions? Did they know how to subtract fractions? So breaking down that unit into skills, and then knowing where they are, just looking at the data and saying, okay, I have these 8 kids, all of them are struggling to add fractions, so I'm going to spend half the class just working with that group, while the others are going to continue on that path. And it took a lot of time to get to that, which you alluded to much earlier. It took years to get there, and I think that it goes in steps and chunks, where you maybe just do small group instruction, where you have one set of students doing this skill, they're all doing the same. You have another group that's meeting with you. You have another group that's maybe they're all doing independent stuff, and you get comfortable with that. And the more and more you do that, and the more and more you develop that content, that's where you can individualize more and more. It was a 5-year progression for me to go from station rotation to like kind of flipping, to using flipped videos in my classroom, to being completely self-paced like you're describing. So it takes years. And with that progression of comfort and structure, I would love your opinion. If so, you have the confidence in that structure. If you were moved into, high school, or a different component of music where you had no experience teaching that content, is this something you think you'd be able to implement year one? Or do you think it's really important to know how most students learn the content that you're in charge of teaching before you can kind of develop these individualized paces? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before, because I've always just envisioned myself being a middle school teacher the rest of my life. But in the scenario where that did happen, I don't think I'd be able to implement it the first year, because you're right. I think I would have to know the mental process of a high schooler. I've never taught high schoolers more than one semester in an emergency situation. And I would want to take a year to find out how far I can push them, what their breaking point level is, I guess. How far can they go? And then I would want to take that data and use it to implement the system. Just like you, this took me years to put together. And even if I were to try to make a new system like this, I probably wouldn't be able to make it in a year in a new situation anyway. Which is part of the reason that I do what I do with the websites and the books, because I know how long it takes, and I don't want somebody else to have to go through that exact same thing. So as long as somebody is teaching beginner band, then they can take the methods that I'm using. If they're teaching another subject, I still think that the method is great. You're just going to have to come up with the system on your own.
Yeah, definitely. And with working with potentially like a new content area. So, if you're a fifth grade teacher, you move to third grade, or you are middle school social studies, you move to high school social studies, or even just a different topic in social studies, algebra to pre-calc, whatever those moves are. There's in teaching the way you're teaching, I think it's an art and it's a science. The science is the data tracking, it's the structure of the system, but the art is your instruction, is your ability to pull 5 kids because you see they're struggling with this skill, and without any preparation, without any planning, without any thought before that moment, you can pull them and you can teach that, fingering or those different skills, because you've mastered the art of teaching all of the skills in your, 100-point system. And I think you need time to develop that art, as well as kind of prepare the aspects for the science and the data behind it. So management of your space, management of the students. You talked about encouraging them to talk to each other, which I think is fantastic. Are there any other aspects that you would say from a management standpoint that you think have helped you be successful with the way that you teach that is not typical with the structure of a classroom?
One of them is time. This system has, believe it or not, saved me tons and tons of time, um, for a couple of reasons. Before I was doing the system, I might have 60 private lessons that I'm teaching over the summer, and I would have to come in 2 hours early every day to figure out exactly where everybody was and figure out materials to give to them that was at their level. Um, and then I was constantly planning from day to day. What are we doing next? What are we doing next? Um, Now, since everything is planned out in a sequence and in a complete sequence, and I've got the computer uh, tracking data to follow, all I have to do is come in the morning, open it up, and look at that, glance at it for a few minutes, say, okay, this is where we're taking off from here. And so that means that everything's planned out for me. The timing of when it's going to happen varies from year to year based on where everybody's at and how quickly the group's going. But I don't have to come in 2 hours early to find individual music for every single student. So that extra time then gives me time to do stuff like make websites, make books, and do podcasts, but also to even develop the system even more.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah.
I've had a teacher where I've talked to them about the idea of like some flipped lessons and strategies like that, where some of their pullback is, I want to, I don't want to just have my students watch videos. I value developing a relationship with them. And I always felt that in doing this, I have much deeper, much more meaningful relationships with my students because I actually spend more time with them on an individual basis versus a one teacher to 30 kid relationship, in just general instruction. How has it impacted, how much you get to know your students, how much you feel it helps with rapport, because you're kind of already doing private lessons. Has it amplified it? Has it helped it in any way? What's been the impact in terms of that?
I would agree with your assessment on that because, for one, you get to really understand the way that every student's mind works. Um, and I kind of take pride in the fact that I can stand on my podium in front of the group, look out at 100 faces, and say something and know exactly how every single one of those 100 kids takes it. Did this person understand it? Does this one process it maybe a little differently? Which then helps you to reword things, to go at things from a different angle, to not just say something one way, but to say it several different ways for the kids that are in the group. Um, so yeah, it takes away the conveyor belt approach to education, which is just throwing all the same information at everybody. And if they get it, they get it. And if they don't, they don't, which is awful, I think, because then if the kids don't get it and then you move on, then they had no foundation on which to build their knowledge. So the rest of the stuff that you're throwing onto them doesn't have anywhere to settle. It's firm. They need a firm foundation. And if that means going a little slower for a student till they build that foundation, then they're gonna grasp it better. So yeah, I feel like I understand the way that the kids think better in this manner. And also, it's true that you do get to spend some individual time with the kids and talk to them that way. And I think the kids probably feel a stronger bond that way than sitting in a classroom with 30 or 100 other people listening to you say the same thing is tailored to them. And I'm sure the kids appreciate that as well.
What kind of impact has it had on the culture of your band, the interest in the program? Well, before I ask that, is does every student go through this intro to band, or is it volunteer for them? You talked about trying to get them to pick an instrument, so I assume they're volunteering or selecting to join in your courses. Is that correct?
Right. We do not force kids into the
Okay.
program.
So how is this impacted, the amount of students that are interested in joining band, the amount of students that remain or in the program for 2 or 3 years, and just overall the culture of your band and your entire group, with the way you've kind of modified and adjusted your instruction.
Very good question. One that we've actually done master's level research on, using the band, and to kind of summarize that briefly, what we found is that through using this program, the one thing that happens is the advanced kids who were already advanced anyway, they can advance so much more quickly because they're not being pulled back by repeating the same information over and over again. You give it to them once, they master it, they move on to the next thing, and they can fly through it, which then makes them enjoy the subject more because they're better at it. On the flip side of that, on the other end, you've got the kids that are at the lowest level, who we found through the research, their number one reason for quitting was they just didn't feel like they were any good at it. So they'd quit. And part of the reason they didn't feel like they were any good at it is because it was moving, the classroom instruction was going so much past their level that they finally just lost that foundation I was talking about earlier, and then they quit. So this has helped that end because they are not being stretched past their limit. They're being taught right at their level, and it's stuff that they can comprehend and they can do and they can understand. So they're not feeling the pressure of that. So in that regard, retention has been better. Now, especially on the higher end, we've had all kinds of kids that are now qualifying for state competitions, things like that weren't beforehand. We sent 20 kids to district festival after we implemented this. Before we implemented it, it was some years we'd have none or we'd have one. But then with just in a couple of years, that number went up to 20. Same thing at the high school level. We've seen that carry over there. Kids are going on into high school. Used to we'd have 0 to 1 go to state. This year we have 6 going to state. So we can see the fruits of the program that are going on. The other great thing that's happening in Olney is that the local community college offers free college tuition to any student who's just in the band. Doesn't matter what degree they're going into. So now we're starting to see kids who are going through with their free instrument, their free lessons, the individualized instruction, that are getting free associate's degrees. And then a lot of them are now going on to become band directors. So that's been really exciting to me to see that the kids have fallen in love with it like that, stick with it, gotten to a level where they can play at state. They've been able to do it all for free, and now they're going to make a career out of it.
That's incredible. It's a really good description of I like the advanced versus the low level, and I would venture to guess that they probably just enjoy your class way more. And if they enjoy the class way more, they're going to want to stay involved. For the kids in the middle that maybe they weren't ever going to be frustrated, they weren't ever going to be getting the solos, going on the states, but they just want to go there. Well, if they enjoy your class much more, if they enjoy the culture, the dynamic of the way you run the room, they're going to be motivated to stay. And, I don't think it's something that as teachers we should ever undervalue. Whether students are volunteering to join your class because you teach electives, or they're forced to be in your class because it's mandatory curriculum and subject areas. I mean, it's not a direct quote, but it comes from the book Teach Like a Pirate. Like, we ask, would you be able to sell tickets for your classroom? And, it's not that you need to put on a dog and pony show. You need to create a culture, a dynamic, a classroom atmosphere that they enjoy being a part of, that they feel motivated to work in. And I can only imagine the level of work ethic increase that you see in the way that you're empowering your students. What would be something tangible we could take away for our listeners in terms of what do check-ins look like? How are you either creating this flipped instruction to get them towards that check-in, or what do your check-ins look like? Because it seems like you have a lot of automatic stuff going on, which is an important component.
One important thing is to make it as simple as possible. You can check a fairly complex concept in a simple way. So as an example, kids have a difficult time sometimes learning what we call a triplet. And a triplet's where you put 3 notes into the space of where you normally have 2 notes. So instead of going da, da, that would be da, 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 da. And for some reason, the kids just can't wrap their minds around that. But sometimes you'll see in method books where they're teaching this concept, they'll combine that with teaching like the super highest note on a clarinet, which is already really hard to play. So now all of a sudden the kids are trying to learn how to make noise on this really high note on a clarinet while also trying to demonstrate too that they know how to play this triplet, which is just one example of something that makes for a very challenging checkoff. So I would divide that up into its simplest portions. It doesn't have to be complicated. Do a checkoff where the kid plays 2 notes that are super high on a clarinet and call that a checkoff. Okay, you know how to play those 2 high notes. Do another note where they play the absolute easiest note on a clarinet, which is one with no fingers, and have them play a triplet. Da, da, da. Say, okay, you mastered the triplet. No need to make it completely crazy like that. And then it's just a checkoff. Okay, you've mastered this. You've mastered that note. You've mastered how to play a triplet. And you accumulate those things over time and make those check-ins really, really easy like that so that you can see that the kid understands the concept. Once they understand the concept, then you can start giving them stuff that's a little more difficult. I think, speaking in terms of music teachers, I think one of the problems that music teachers make a lot of the times is giving a really difficult assignment, not giving much explanation to the kid of how to do it, not even knowing if they know how to do it yet, sending them to practice on it. And if the kid does what they're supposed to do, which is practice on it for an hour or 2 over the week, then what they've done is they've practiced it wrong for an hour or 2. They come into the next lesson, they play it for you completely incorrectly, and now you have to teach them. You have to unteach what they've already learned on their own, teach them the right way, and it's a vicious cycle because now you've run out of time. And you give them another assignment that you haven't explained because you didn't have time, and they take that and they learn it wrong as well, and they do that for 3 years. Give them something simple that you know that they understand. Have them practice that. When they master it, then you can get a little more complex.
I love that. That is not just something that happens in music. That you could apply that to any content area. English, forming sentence structures wrong, at basic elementary level, or higher end, secondary, developing works cited page. They're doing a bibliography and they do 8 sources and they do all 8 sources wrong, and now you have to reteach them, and now they have to redo that work. They're going to be frustrated. Like you said, that it's so common when we run out of time that we fly through the explanation and say, okay, do this for homework tonight so that tomorrow when you come back, I can stay to my pacing guide. But like you said, we're just escalating the problem because now we're going to have to undo all that, fall farther behind. It is a vicious cycle, and keeping it simple, I think, is so important. I just keep hearing what you're saying and relating it to when I was teaching either 5th grade or even teaching STEM and teaching coding skills. Looking at how to code, it can be very complex and it can be very simple. Teaching 2nd graders how to code, it's a simple explanation of coding is just a series of directions. So how do we get from point A to point B, and we identify every direction? If you need to, I did a thing where they kind of would walk around a maze and there was crates, and if they had to step over a crate, they couldn't say step over the crate. They had to say, step up with your right foot, step up with your left foot, step down with your right foot, step down with your left foot. So really breaking down that system of simplicity and explaining every detail. And the check-ins are so important. When I was doing this with 5th grade math, I would have check-ins where they would answer questions on a Google form and it automatically graded it for me. So at the end of the day, during my prep time, whatever it was, I could just look at the data and pull out the kids that I know needed a review of that skill. And I could pull out the kids that I knew could just go right into a challenge. But also, things that can't be automatically graded. Doing long division, I wanted to see, could they go through the entire process? So on their guide, one of the check-ins said, solve this problem on a whiteboard and walk up to Mr. Ehrman and show him your whiteboard. And so the kids would walk up to me. I could glance at it in 5 seconds and see if they understood the process or not. I didn't even care if it was necessarily right. I wanted to see, did they understand the steps? And so, that's going to be very similar to a music demonstration. So in your classroom, are you spending a lot of time? Do you spend time pulling small groups? Do you spend time floating and assisting, waiting for students to demonstrate? Kind of what does your role look like throughout the day? And I know it would fluctuate day to day, but just in common, what are some main things that you're doing as a facilitator of your space?
There are a whole lot of different ways to do this, and that's a question that I get asked a lot from different band directors, because every band director's situation is different. Some band directors have private lessons throughout the day where they get to pull out small groups. Some band directors do not, and I've seen different ways to do this. I've seen most rooms have practice rooms, and you can put a Chromebook or an iPad in there. I've seen band directors who will say every kid gets 20 minutes in the practice room with an iPad once every 2 weeks, and it's scheduled time during the ensemble. You can go in there and you can play. You can also do it at home. You can make. I have kids that make recordings at home, and they'll bring them in and play them for me, like right before class or before the school day. Rarely do I do it. Rarely do I ever take a full period and do that, just because you get so many kids in the classroom all playing different stuff. It really hurts your ears. So it's mainly in a pull out situation like that, where a kid might be able to go play by themselves. And a lot of your more advanced kids will actually end up recording themselves at home. There is software out there. One of them in particular is called Smart Music, where kids can play these short examples, and Smart Music will actually listen to them and give them a grade. And if they get an A+, they can send that to me, and right there I've got the recording. I can listen to it at home, and I can put the point in. But I try to find creative ways to not have to do it during class time. Something else I want to say that you got my mind jogging a minute ago. I am kind of against the idea I talked about earlier, the conveyor belt teaching, where everybody moves along at their same pace. And I hinted at this earlier. If you get a kid, say, math is very similar to music, extremely similar to music. So a lot of the concepts kind of overlap here. But say you get a kid who just doesn't understand how to multiply. And so you do a unit on multiplication, then you have a unit test. And the kid gets 0%, just totally bombs everything. Well, then we move the class on and we go on to the next thing that might build upon multiplication. That kid will never, ever, from that point on, do better than a 0 in anything, because they didn't understand the fundamental concept, where I talk about making stuff as simple as possible. So one method of teaching would be to give the kid an F and then continue to give Fs after that. My approach is more, all right, you didn't grasp it. It wasn't correct. Do it again. And I'm going to give you some instruction. I want you to do it again. Maybe next time you get 20%. Yeah, you're not there yet. Do it again. Okay, this time you got 50%. You're not quite there yet. Do it again. And you might do it again 40 times. I do that with vocabulary tests. Kids can take them as many times as they want. They can take them 100 times until they get an A+. And it's the A+ that goes in my grade book, because they passed it. Whenever you pass something, you got an A+ on it. I never give anything less than that. And I never write down how many times it took. So to get through 10 things, it might take one person 1,000 times. It might take the other person 10 times, but they still get the exact same grade. And what that shows me is they mastered it. And that's what I'm concerned about as a teacher. I want the kids to master the concept. And that's why I do it at their own pace. Once they master it, they can move on to the next thing, and they have the foundation, and they're going to understand it, and you're never going to leave them behind.
I'm right in sync there with you, and I agree 100%. If you're doing that, it's not even about instructional style at this point. It's just like you said, if you know they fail it, they don't understand it, and you move on. Those, like you said, math and music overlap so much. A lot of the subject areas do. If they don't understand the concepts and you move on, you're typically building upon those concepts, and they're not going to succeed. You say, oh, I'll catch them up as we go. So now you have a struggling student who is going to struggle with the next unit, and you're expecting them to catch up and relearn past concepts. But to play devil's advocate, not because I don't agree with you, I 100% do, but you will have teachers that have a very strict pacing guide that they have to follow for a year's pace. And so, what I would say is, those unit tests that you have, I always told my students, you should not be surprised by your score, and I'm not going to be surprised either, because you should know exactly where you're at before that test. Did everyone in my class get an A? Absolutely not. Did students fail? At times. And, it was sometimes a measure for them to learn that they're not doing their work. They're not picking up their end of the bargain. But I went back and I worked with that student until they could pass it again. But, those constant check-ins, they are for you, but, they're for the students too. They're for them to be aware of how well they're doing. Are they succeeding? And so when they got to those tests, they knew, hey, this is a unit that, I'm struggling with a little bit more, but I'm still going to go in. I'm going to kick butt. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to get a solid B, and I'm going to be really happy with that. And a solid B, they do understand the content, but they might struggle with some key components, or, they might get some scrap work wrong where they're off, but they understand the concept. There's so many nuances to that, but you can individualize, you can let them run at their own pace, but you can kind of herd them all back at the end of a unit, and then you can start the process again. If you have students that know the skills, let them do enrich stuff, let them do projects, let them do challenge things, and spend a majority of your time with the struggling students or the students at the normal pace. And then when you check in with that advanced group, doesn't mean you're going to ignore them for the unit, but talk about their project. Don't review the skill that they already know. There's so many ways to individualize it and to cater to their needs. Like you said, with the results you're seeing with those advanced students is really incredible. And I think it's only going to grow for you the longer you have this in place. I mean, that success you're seeing at the high school, I can't imagine what it's going to look like in 2 or 3 years with where you're pacing your program now. For a music teacher, or for any teacher in particular, what advice would you have for them to just get started? What is a slight tweak they could do in their, for lack of a better term, very normal style of instruction right now to start to get the wheels turning for what this could look like in 2 or 3 years?
I would say I have 2 bits of advice for that. Number one would be and it's something that everybody's already done, sequence out exactly what you're wanting to teach through the course of that year, and figure out what's the easiest way that I can check for mastery on each one of these things. And then it just becomes a matter of putting these materials together, which could be a year-long journey. Another thing that you could do is record little short snippets, short 2 to 5 minute snippets of every concept that you teach, and keep those on a computer file, because after the end of a year, you're going to have short 2 to 5 minute snippets of every concept that you teach that you can then put in to any of your lessons. Or you could put it on the internet, and the kids can go back and refer to that. I like to use QR codes a lot, because almost everybody has a smartphone and a QR code reader. So on my music, what I will do that I pass out, I'll put QR codes that have links to the music that they can listen to. Wouldn't it be cool? And I'm starting to see this from one of my elementary school daughter's math teachers. Wouldn't it be cool to have QR codes on some of those math examples where it's being taught differently than when we were kids in school? And as a parent, I understand math, but I have a hard time knowing exactly how the teacher wants it taught. So scan it with your phone, and there's a 2-minute clip of the teacher explaining that concept. I've seen some homework come home like that, which makes life a whole lot easier for me. But you can start to put these explanations that you have onto homework that you send home, or papers that you send home, or on the internet with links that you send home, and the kids can go back and reference them, or they can get ahead and start working on some other stuff.
Those are 2 fantastic pieces of advice. I just wrote a note for myself because I want to share it on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show52. I had multiple worksheets where I had those QR codes built in, and it was for the students. It was a review of that particular problem so they could watch it and check their work afterwards. But those flipped lessons, like you said, those short clips, parents absolutely love them. In the era of, you hit on a hot topic anywhere you are in this country, the new math. Parents not can't stand the way that math is taught nowadays. But I didn't have those conversations in my class because the parents could just watch the videos and they would say, "Oh, yeah, that's different, but I understand why they're teaching it that way, or I get it. That's really not that different." They love the videos just as much as my students, and 2 to 5 minutes, absolutely. I would say max of 8. Very skill specific, like you said. I taught area and perimeter. Area was its own lesson. Perimeter was its own lesson. It wasn't area and perimeter. And so, one, it made it shorter, which was the goal. And two, if I had my student who was struggling with perimeter, he just watched the perimeter lesson, not the area and perimeter, not confusing those concepts together. But keeping it very skill specific, like you said, I think is super important. Do you have any other advice for success with those flipped lessons or developing that content?
I think we've covered about everything.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. And I would say it takes more time, but definitely record it with the intention of being that lesson. Not Don't record your whole class. It won't translate. It'll be too long. You have all the behavior interruptions. It's got to be a purposeful separate recording that you will leverage at a later point.
And the shorter, the better. One of the things I found in 17 years is sometimes these shortest lessons are the ones that the kids remember the best and perform the best with. I do a lesson where I teach 6/8 time, which is something that a lot of band directors just will explain and explain and explain until the kids have no clue what they're doing. And I do it without saying a word. And we do it in 20 minutes and they master it. And the point is, sometimes you don't have to say anything for these kids to understand it. The more you say, the more confused they get.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am going to jump right past our lesson lens. We've been knee deep in this content and instructional strategies, which has been fantastic. So I just want to end our show with our exit ticket, the same 5 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1: what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
For me, I think it's just a matter of creating a positive atmosphere with the kid. I go into it knowing that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and okay, here's a big one. I never ever get on to kids for asking the same question that somebody else just asked. You'll see some people that'll just say, "If you would be paying attention, somebody just asked it." That's one way to get the kids to never ask questions.
Yeah.
Instead, smile at them and answer, and make sure that you're being pleasant with all of them.
That's such a good point. It happens so much, and it's just like you said, one, you're going to get them to stop asking questions, and what's the point? I mean, we all make the same mistakes, as teachers. When we're the students, we're in a grad class, we're in a faculty meeting, we do all the things that we yell at our kids for. If we just took time to reflect and realize that they're not doing it on purpose, they're being human. I think it's just human nature. So what is the best advice you've ever received? Maybe it's from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Breathe. That's probably the best advice I've ever gotten. I will say that whenever I first started this job, and I started this show an hour ago saying this, that I wasn't good at it. I didn't have a great experience the first couple of years, and I honestly wanted to quit. And I had people that were wiser than me that told me to relax, take a deep breath. It does get better. It turns out that the years go by really fast. Whenever you get 17 years into it, the year's over like that. But regroup over the summer and take what you've learned from the previous year and build on that.
Absolutely. So true. So the school year goes in waves. There are those days or weeks that we struggle to survive. As classroom teachers, it might be report cards, conferences. As the music teacher is prepping for your competitions, your concerts. So when we are in those moments, what is something that every educator needs to hear to power up and to surpass that moment of struggle?
I'm unique in that I kind of thrive on those times, and I think all music teachers do. I think music teaching has a zillion different jobs that are done at the desk that are behind the scenes, and I know that there's grading papers for all teachers and lesson planning. I love it. That's why I teach middle school. That's why I teach band. But for me, it's just stepping back and seeing some of those students who have gone through my program that are now having families of their own, careers of their own. They've got children. They're they're up in their mid 30s by now for me, and seeing what they're doing with their lives and seeing that there's record producers, that there are band directors, that there are people that are playing on or performing on Broadway, and seeing the impact that you have on those kids later down the line. For me, that's what keeps me going, knowing the impact. Sometimes it isn't something that you see right away. You don't see it from day to day, but as the years start to accumulate, you start seeing it and play out in the lives of your previous students.
Awesome. I love it. That's so true. So, last real question. It's so easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom, and I'm excited to hear your answer to this based on our conversation. What would you say separates teachers who constantly seek change, innovation, and new teaching strategies?
Teaching middle school is it's especially very important to keep things changed. But it's kind of a balancing act. Kids want there to be structure and they want to kind of know what to expect, but there has to be this element of surprise in there too. And there's different ways to do that. For me, it's having a concert at the end of every year where the kids get to pick the music. It's like, hey, we're going to be studying this for the next 3 months. What do you want to study? And I give them guidelines, and I give them a website to go to, and I say, pick what you want, and I'll order it. I'll have the school pay for it, and then we're going to learn it. So that's a way that I can control the level of what we're doing, and I can create the lessons around it. But the kids have control over what's being taught, which is different every year. It's not the same thing every year. And then another thing that has been great for me is a stuffed goat that's in the front of the room, because the kids love the stuffed goat, and the stuffed goat can sometimes do crazy things. Like if I have to yell at the flutes because they're out of tune, the stuffed goat can do it instead of me, because then I'm not the one that's being mean to them. The stuffed goat is. Middle schoolers like that kind of thing, and I think I teach middle school because I think kind of like a middle schooler, and I'm kind of crazy most of the time. So that keeps a little bit of element of surprise for the kids, because they don't know what's going to come out of my mouth next.
That's awesome.
In kind of in a playful manner.
Yep. So before I ask the last simple question, you gotta allude here, the stuffed goat. What is that?
It's something that showed up in the classroom one day that the kids were curious about, and then and the goat's name's not Bob, because I don't know why. Which the kids get a kick out of that, but I don't know. Kids like having a stuffed goat in the front of the room, and it builds camaraderie. I don't know.
Sometimes they latch on to the silliest things like that. That's really funny. So last simple question: how can our audience connect with you, follow you, stay in tune with your story and what you're doing for education?
Well, a couple of ways to do that. You can follow my music specific blog on Facebook, which is Thoughts from a Beginning Band Director. In fact, if you were to get on that, you could contact me through Messenger. The way that most people contact me is through Facebook Messenger. Just look for Eric Combs and look for the bald guy. Or if anybody wants to email me, feel free to do that as well. It's Eric1981Combs at gmail.com. ERIC 1981 COMBS at gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. We'll link to everything that you just shared in our show notes page, which again can be found at powereduup.com/show52. Eric, thank you so much. This has been a blast. This is going to come out probably late January, early February, but this is December 28th that we are recording this on. So we are in the middle of the coveted winter break, and Eric went back to his school to record this, which I'm super grateful for it. I felt bad when I found out that he was doing that, but it speaks to the dedication that you have towards education. And that was clear our entire conversation tonight. You're super passionate. I've had a blast. I've learned a lot and you're doing great things. Your school, your state, and our country as a whole, we're super lucky to have you as a part of our education foundation, and just trying to make a change and make a difference for what middle school band instruction can look like and what instruction can look like as a whole overall. So if this is the first time you're tuning in with us, whether on YouTube or your podcast app of choice, we encourage you to please hit the subscribe button, leave a rating and review, leave some comments, let us know how we're doing. What do you like? What do you not like? If you're back for more, we appreciate you listening. I encourage you to go back and listen to some of our other guests. We have incredible educators almost every week. I've learned so much through this journey, and I look forward to continuing that with more of our guests. So, Eric, thanks again, and thanks everyone. And on behalf of myself and Eric and my co-host Matt, who ditched me during winter break, I'm going to power down this episode. And Eric, you left us feeling powered up. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all that you do with this podcast.